Hello and welcome back, everybody. We are going to go ahead and jump right back into it. I am going to send out the links again for the instructions and the signing the attendance. So if you haven't done so already, please do that. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So Scott Jensen has stepped up to present next. He's an operations manager and meteorologist with WeatherNet. So go ahead and stop this. All right, Scott, it's all you.
Alrighty, see if we can share the screen here. How's that? You guys see okay?
Looks good. Go ahead.
Perfect. So I have the coveted post-lunch spot, so I'll see what I can do to keep everybody awake. But we'll keep rolling here. So Ron was kind enough to ask us to present on Pathfinder, what it is and kind of how it has evolved over the years from something that we've used here in Utah, where I am based in Salt Lake City, to something that we've continued to grow and expand into fire forecasting and debris flows and flooding concerns over the year. So really quick overview of just what I want to talk about with you guys today, the background of what exactly Pathfinder is, a little bit of a preview. It's a partnership between the federal, state, and private sector entities when it comes to weather. We'll talk about how that program got started and where it has progressed since that time over the last 20 years or so. What some of the goals are, why we do Pathfinder, what some of those advantages have been over the years. We've documented several case studies, what the advantages of the Pathfinder project have been. So we'll talk about some of that stuff. They've improved safety, mobility, and the economy. Those are the primary goals, and of course, to preserve the life and property as well. And then finally, I want to wrap up giving you guys a few examples on exactly how Pathfinder has evolved and been used for burn scars, flooding incidents. The first example will be from here in Utah, and then it was then expanded over the last couple of years to several fires in California, most notably the Briceburg and Ferguson fires here in 2019 and 2020 when those weather stations were deployed out there. And so we'll talk a little bit about how we got those weather stations deployed and what some of their uses have been over the last couple of years here. So just a little bit of a background on what Pathfinder is. Pathfinder is basically a partnership between the federal level, which was most frequently the National Weather Service, the local state level, which is most frequently departments of transportation and various state agencies, and then also kind of a private partnership as well. So this could be any private company that's involved in weather forecasting or weather monitoring as well. The goal with Pathfinder is to produce a consistent message to all of the end users so that each one of those entities isn't giving out their own message. Initially, this was heavily focused around winter weather, so you will see me talking a little bit about that just to kind of demonstrate to you guys how this got started. As you know, especially kind of in the Intermountain West and Midwestern states, winter weather tends to be the most impactful for the majority of our populations. So we wanted to make sure that all of our entities are giving the public a unified message that they can respond to. A really good example of why we're doing this is that the National Weather Service and the Department of Transportation often make their own forecasts. Just to give you guys an idea, I'm with WeatherNet. We are hired by UDOT to be their weather representatives. We give them all of their private weather forecasts. And the reason they asked us to do that is to make a forecast for the roads specifically. So why that's different is, for example, this time of year in October, the National Weather Service may put out a forecast for 2 inches of snow. But if we at the DOT know that that snow is not going to be able to accumulate on the paved surfaces and may just be on the grass or on the hood of your car, that's a very different forecast as far as what the impacts are going to be to the user. So while we may be saying that the roads are going to be wet and the Weather Service is saying 2 inches of snow, both forecasts are spot on, but the public doesn't know how to respond to that when they're seeing two different products being issued to them from two different agencies. So what we started doing right around 2002 when Salt Lake City was hosting the Winter Olympics is teaming up with the National Weather Service to develop that coordinated message to ensure that the public knew how to respond. There's several ways that we coordinate that message. The first thing we do is every day we're all logged into the National Weather Service chat. So a lot of our DOT and private entities will chat directly with the National Weather Service offices. We will set up conference calls with them, phone coordination meetings, as you see here listed as one of the bullet points. We set up those calls every single time we're expecting a storm to roll through the state. That could be 24 to 72 hours before the storm occurs, depending on how big we think that storm is going to be. Those coordination calls will also lead to a sharing of messages. So our highway folks may want to be putting up signs over the tops of the interstates. The National Weather Service will share what their thoughts are and issuing watches and warnings so that we can make sure that we're kind of figuring out all the mediums that the public is going to get our message and making sure that they're all in sync. We will also pass along any observations that we have to each other, any warning from our crews in the field, things like that, so that we make sure that everybody's as up to date on the ground truth as possible. So that's kind of how it got started in the early 2000s. In 2013, we also expanded to work not only with our Salt Lake City office, but our Grand Junction office here in Colorado, which covers the eastern counties of Utah. And then the following year, in 2014 and 15, the federal government got involved and asked that we really work to expand Pathfinder. They saw the success that it was having in Utah, and they wanted to expand it. So initially, kind of a pilot program was set up just during the I-80 corridor through the western states, pretty much from Cheyenne to about the San Francisco area. So at that time, we had multiple states getting involved. They kind of all teamed up. They came to Utah. They learned about what it was that we were doing here that was making it successful. And then they kind of committed to working with their various entities in each of those states, which is a little bit of a different setup depending where you are, and do the same thing with Pathfinder in those locations. I will say since this time, it has continued to expand, and there are now dozens of states that are using Pathfinder across the country. It's no longer just a Western thing. It's being used throughout the Midwest and even into the Northeast, pretty heavily in the winter states, of course, but we've also seen use now for locations that are experiencing fires and hurricanes, things like that, to also get a unified message out to the public. So why are we coordinating? Why is this such a big deal? This graph here shows over 1 year in the entire travel system of Utah and vehicle miles traveled, what our commute times were. So a 1 on that commute time means that everyone was going the speed limit. If you look underneath that 1, that means people were speeding. So as you can see, there's a fair amount of days when people are going a little bit quicker than the speed limit in and out of work. Every single dot that you see here highlighted in red is a weather event. So you can see that our traffic engineers here at the Department of Transportation have identified that 100% of the events when our time was above a 1.1, our travel time, was associated with weather. So every single one of them, especially these ones you can see here in the high range up above that 1.3 range, were very significant weather events when we had quite a bit of snow going on across the area, quite a bit of freezing rain, things like that. So more than anything, weather has the largest impact on our traveling infrastructure and our times for our public that's traveling. So as I mentioned, our goal is to inform the travelers of basically how to change their behavior. So we have found that if we are sharing with them the same message throughout our agencies, that they are much more likely to change their behavior. That optimizes our mobility, it decreases our congestion. If we can tell them that there's a storm coming in at 8 a.m., maybe plan your commute around that time. You can leave a little earlier, you want to leave a little bit later, things like that. It really decreases our congestion that we have on the road. We're also sharing resources, as I mentioned. So if we have new areas of concern, whether that's for a particularly bad area of winter weather, if it's a burn scar, if it's an area where construction is really causing a lot of problems, we can deploy resources to those areas. It might be a weather station or new observers in that area. We also share with them plow reports that are coming in throughout the DOT, accident reports that are coming in from our highway patrol. We also have a lot of traffic cameras and a citizen reporter program where they can mark down weather that they're seeing in their area that we can all share between each other. Obviously, the National Weather Service is experts when it comes to getting the message out, so we're really relying on them to help us get that message out to the public while they're relying on us to tell them what we think the impacts are going to be to the roads. And then, of course, just the final goal there is, of course, improving that safety and mobility in the economy of the area. So we have actually done a couple studies to see exactly what the change in behavior has been. And so this has been really key to the continued growth and success of Pathfinder. I will note really quickly before I talk about this slide, if you look down at the bottom, I do have a link to the article that this is based on. There was an article written here between the federal, state, and private agencies talking about exactly how this entire program has played out over the past few years and exactly what benefits we've seen from it. And so that's there down at the bottom of your screen if you ever want to go ahead and link that article and read it for yourself. But to explain to you guys a little bit about what we're seeing on this graph, we wanted to do a comparison between a dry day and a day when there was a big storm coming through the Salt Lake City area in particular, and basically look and see if we're making any difference with the messaging that we're putting out to the public. So what we did, if you look at this red line here, that is an average day that is dry. We're not expecting any impacts on the road. That was taken on January 17th, 2013. And as you can see, there's a pretty good morning commute around 6 to 7 a.m. and then a little bit of a dip during the day while everyone's at work. And then we have a pretty significant peak there right around 5 p.m. when everybody's starting to head home before where things drop off pretty dramatically after that. What we then had was a fairly significant winter storm coming through on January 10th, 2013. So just a week earlier, it was taken on the exact same day of the week and everything. And we went ahead and coordinated with the National Weather Service. We put up variable messaging signs over our interstates telling folks that there would be road snow during the commute the following day. That road snow was expected to start at a certain time, whether it was 5 p.m. or 4 p.m., whatever it may be, depending on the exact location of that sign. The Weather Service issued a winter storm warning. They informed travelers they could find information on road conditions at the UDOT website. And we shared a lot of resources. We got the word out, and the public really responded well. So if you look at this blue line, throughout the morning hours, you can see that the blue line matches up very closely with the red line, and that continues until about lunchtime. You can actually then see the blue line peaks at 3 p.m. and does not see any sort of a peak at 5 p.m. Instead, it sees a continued decrease. So what we saw was that our peak commute for the evening time shifted 2 hours earlier, and we actually had 43% fewer cars on the road at that time than we saw in a typical day. The really cool thing about this story is at that 3 p.m. period, when we did see that commute peak, there was no snow falling at all. So people didn't wait around to see the snow. They were seeing the messaging. They were getting that message out from the folks that are at the state and federal level. And they were making that decision before they saw the snow, instead of just saying like, oh, I see it's starting to snow, I should head home now. Let's make that decision ahead of time so we can get you off the road before any of those impacts started. The biggest predictor of change in someone's behavior that we found in our studies was they're looking at government and state sources. So if there's professional sources that are giving them this information, that was the biggest predictor of their change in behavior. And that could be, taking public transit. It could be leaving work early. It could be deciding to work from home that day. It could be a variety of things that they did to change it. But we found that while people do gather their information from a variety of sources, such as your cell phone app or your local news or your government sources, the ones that did look at the government sources were the most likely to change their behavior. So that's a little bit about where we started. So as I mentioned, we kind of started with winter weather. And as we have continued to develop Pathfinder over the years, we've really rolled that into other needs as well. So this is not designed as something that's just a winter weather type of product. It's meant to be anything that's weather related that's going to impact our travel public. If we can improve safety, livelihoods, that's great. So in 2012 and 2013, we began to make the jump to fire weather, and more specifically flooding and debris flows that were relating from that fire weather. We had a fairly serious wildfire here in Utah, which I'll talk about here in a little bit, that really kind of kicked things off and got us going. And we determined with the Weather Service, working through them, that we want to make sure that we are taking into factors like burn severity, size, shape of the basin, what kind of rainfall factors are we going to have to see to create a debris flow, whether it's rainfall rates or snowmelt. We actually have seen a couple instances where rapid snowmelt has led to very small debris flows, not obviously as much as a rainfall, but it is still a concern. So we worked with them in coordination with the Weather Service and other organizations, which I'll bring up here in a moment, to kind of develop that protocol.